Cosatu has said that workers have high expectations of the State of the Nation address. The Federation says that the challenges facing workers, the economy and the nation are immense. Now let's speak to Matthew Parks, who is Cosatu's parliamentary representative. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsfeed this afternoon. Now, as Cosatu, you say your expectations are high for the State of the Nation address, and you're expecting the President to cover issues like load shedding, endemic crime and corruption, including cable theft, amongst other things like dysfunctional municipalities. Tell us more.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I think we all know the challenge we're facing as a country. Obviously, they hit working class families the hardest, from a 41% unemployment rate to the painful period of load shedding, to the cable theft and corruption, which has crippled Transnet and Eskom and many other SOEs like the Metro Rail and so forth. The dysfunctional municipalities who struggle to pay their workers in many provinces. So there's a huge amount of challenges. We're struggling to get the economy to grow. And as a consequence, poverty and inequality levels remain quite high. So I think really what we want to hear from the President tomorrow is not to quote English poems, not fancy promises, just to say we recognize the crisis we're facing, and here's what we're planning to do to give more support to Eskom to get us out of the chapter of load shedding. And we want to be honest as well that we have seen real progress in the past year with regards to reducing load shedding. A year ago we had about 12 hours of load shedding a day. Today it's about 2 hours and less, and that's real good progress. But we're not out of the woods. More must be done. I think right now a major crisis we face on the economic front is around Transnet, which is having a huge impact upon the mining, the manufacturing and agricultural sectors, and is posing a threat to thousands of jobs in those industries. We really need to see much more decisive action from government to stabilize Transnet, to get our railway working fully, and of course to modernize our ports, to end the backlog of exports getting to the markets in time. And similarly, we need to see a package of support to other SOEs, whether it's the Post Office or Denel or SABC, the Post Bank, of course local government. And whilst we rebuild these logistical support mechanisms for the economy, we should also see how to spur the economy. That includes investing in infrastructure. But equally, we need to give support to those who don't have jobs. That includes extending the SOD grant to help it recover the inflationary value lost since it was introduced in 2020. We also need to see how we help young people get into the labour market, get experience and skills and confidence and a salary. And one critical tool in that regard is the Presidential Employment Programme. We've seen government reducing that expenditure item. We think it actually needs to be drastically increased to accommodate at least 1 million young people by April. So I think for us, those are the key things. A clear sense of what are we going to do, what are the time frames, what are the specific interventions and the amount that we're going to allocate to ensure they happen. And of course, we need to see a sense of accountability amongst the politicians who are entrusted with these tasks as well.
And speaking of youth employment as well, you've called for an expansion of the presidential employment stimulus. And of course, as you've mentioned now, further relief for SOEs like Eskom and the restabilizing and rebuilding of some SOEs like Post Office and Denel. Now, these SOEs in particular have been on a downward spiral for many years now. Do you think that this particular State of the Nation address, when such a pivotal election year, will be different or make a difference even?
It has to make a difference. It has to be different. For the sake of politicians in the ruling party, allied the ANC, it's an election year. They need to go all out. We've got about 4 or 5 months remaining in this administration, and we think they need to go full force out. But they can make progress. Yes, there are real problems in the state, but we've also seen progress too. For example, in South African Revenue Service, 5 years ago, it was at the epicenter of state capture. The amount of revenue that's collected from the economy to fund the public services we need was dwindling. Yet under competent management, by employing additional staff, by investing in the IT capacity and so forth at SARS, we've seen a remarkable turnaround in the past few years. Where actually in the previous budget, they managed to exceed revenue collection targets by about 90 billion rand. So it shows if you invest in public services, they can deliver the goods. Over the past year, we've seen a very positive turnaround with regards to the electricity front. There's been a significant improvements at Eskom in terms of the generation availability capacity. So that shows you if we deal with the issues of corruption and state capture, if we put in place competent management, if we fill vacancies, if we invest in the infrastructure, we can make progress. But it means we've got to be methodical, we've got to do it across the state. We have to show a sense of urgency because we just don't have the luxury of time. We can't afford a business as usual approach when the challenges facing the economy, facing workers, society at large, businesses, the state are immense. It really requires government to be very aggressive and not to be bold, not to be timid rather.
And Matthew, while there may be some improvements here and there, especially when it comes to load shedding, the lived experience on the ground is still daily power cuts. It's still daily blackouts for ordinary South Africans on the ground. And, you know, we must give credit where it's due. And while the country's unemployment rate also soars, you've also acknowledged and welcomed the slight reduction in that unemployment rate. But we're still sitting at an unemployment rate of more than 40%. Should we not be perhaps withholding our congratulatory stance while the numbers are still so high?
Look, I think we need to do both. The citizens have a right to be grumpy, to be skeptical of politicians. They have a right to expect better from government because we elect people into office. The public funds the state through the taxes. So they have the right in a democracy, and it's very healthy, and it's the correct thing to do to hold government accountable and to be skeptical of politicians. But that's across the board internationally, and we should be no different in that regard. More so given that the challenges we face often in society are because of politicians, whether at a national or provincial or local level, who have misbehaved, who have failed, or have slept on their duty. But equally, we also want to acknowledge where government has done well as too, because we want to encourage them in that regard to say, on this front, actually, you know what? There is good progress. For example, on the SARS, what I mentioned earlier, we've seen a real turnaround there. But also, you know, at times, the other parts have been more difficult. So we've seen on the unemployment front, within the past year, since the previous SONA, unemployment has fallen from 46%, which was devastating, to 41%. Again, no sober person will celebrate a 41% unemployment rate. But we do want to appreciate that we managed to reduce unemployment by 5% in the past year. And I think for us, the critical thing is, can we maintain that momentum? If we can maintain that momentum and get it down by another 5% over this year, that can be a sign that we're beginning to turn the corner. We also do want to appreciate when government does listen to society, listen to workers, or Cosatu, for example. So currently Parliament is busy processing the two-part pension reforms. The bills are before Parliament. They should come into effect with a lot of work remaining to be done by the 1st of September this year. And that will give meaningful relief to millions of highly indebted workers by allowing them to tap into a little bit of the pension funds before they reach retirement without having to resign. So there is progress we want to acknowledge too. We've seen progress, for example, Parliament passing the National Health Insurance Bill last year, amending the Employment Equity Bill Act, including domestic workers and the Compensation of Injury on Duty Act as well. For example, in March next month, the minimum wage is going to increase by 8.5%, so about 3% above inflation, which in this economy is a very positive achievement. It's going to reach 27.58 cents, and that's not a living wage, but it's progress. And if one takes a step back to say when the minimum wage came into effect in 2019, so 5 years ago, we've actually managed to increase it by 40% over these 4 years, and by next year we'd have increased it by about 50% to 30 rand an hour. If you look at where domestic workers were in 2019, they were 15 rand an hour. It's now 27.58 cents. So that's real progress. But having said that, we also do appreciate, and we must also be blunt too, even within those victories, there are real problems too around implementation, around ensuring compliance by employers too. But I think for us, we want to be fair. Where government does well, we want to cheer them on. And where government doesn't do well, we also want to hold them accountable as well.
So let's walk and talk at the same time. Now, let's talk about the Electoral Matters Bill. 14 submissions were made to Parliament. One of those was by Cosatu. You've welcomed the bill in general, but you also have concerns about it. Tell us more.
Yeah. So, look, in essence, the Electoral Amendment Bill is partly governed by the Constitutional Court Directive to allow independent candidates to contest national and provincial elections. So a lot of the issues there were really administrative to accommodate that Constitutional Court Directive, and those were fine, straightforward, etc. We were concerned about two parts. Our major fundamental concern is that the law still allows political parties not to disclose donations currently below 100,000 rand or less. And our fear there is that it's a significant gap where people can simply donate 99,000 rand to political party A and get away with not being disclosed. And I think for us, given the levels of corruption we've seen across our body politic, across all political parties, across all levels of the state, we need to really build a culture of transparency and accountability. And basically, in essence, every single cent that people donate to whatever political party of their choice, That should be disclosed, because really transparency is the most effective tool to defeat corruption. Many other countries across the world have had a maximum transparency provision in their law, like Sweden, and of course they managed to build a very strong sense of accountability and a real zero tolerance towards corruption there. But we also think that when it comes to public funding for political parties or broadcasting space for political parties during the election season, it needs to be based on proportional principles. So in simple terms, whatever money is given from the state, from parliament or from legislators to political parties, it should be based upon what representation they have in parliament or the legislatures. So we recognize the political support a party has, and in terms of when we give funding to them, because not all parties are equal. We shouldn't be treating a party with 50% or 25% or 10%, the same as we would treat a party with 1% or 0.5% too, because we need to recognize our political diversity. We also need to recognize where popular support, political landscape lies as well.
And, I want to talk about that because I guess, smaller parties will be up in arms, especially the new kids on the block who are coming into the fore now. I mean, you're saying that we shouldn't be treating a 1% party the same as we treat a 20, 30, 40 or even 50% party, because it does undermine that proportionality. And they would argue that a vote is a vote is a vote and a seat is a seat is a seat, and that there shouldn't be this threshold.
Well, look, so if Joe Soap only contesting one particular seat in Cape Town, we should really fund him at the same level, given the same broadcasting space as we would to the ANC or the Democratic Alliance or the Economic Freedom Front or whomever, party A, B, and C, whatever, fine, who are contesting, throughout the country in all 9 provinces in all municipalities. So I think we should be fair, but I think also that no political party has a divine right to funding from the public purse. It's a generous part by the state to fund political parties, recognizing they play a key part in our democracy. But we should recognize that, Party X has 25% support, and thus it should be entitled to 25% of the funding that is given by the state to political parties and candidates. Just like we should say that Party, A, who gets 50% of the vote, should be getting 50% of the funding, because that then helps to ensure that the popular support, the will of the public, is expressed in terms of how money is allocated and is also expressed in terms of broadcasting space.
A lot of, sorry to cut you in there, Matthew, a lot of stakeholders have raised concerns with that, saying this disadvantages small parties and it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah. Look, we also need to make our elections and our democracy manageable. Every single election we had, and we've had about 7, I think if I'm right, democratic elections since '94, we've seen a doubling political parties every single time. Yet when you get to Parliament, it's only about 11 or 12 parties who make it in, and it's actually only about 4 parties who actually get more than 1% of the support. We should also be asking ourselves, do we want to fragment the electoral results so much that it becomes impossible for the IEC to manage, becomes even difficult for the ordinary voter when they go to the ballot box? If you're going to have, like we have right now, in this election is about 300 plus political parties, the ballot paper is going to be about 10 pages plus. If we're going to make elections so easy to contest that anybody can contest, you might have a ballot paper of 1,000 people, and the ballot paper might be about 50 pages long. It's going to make the queues very long on election day, which is going to frustrate voters who are queuing for hours at a time. It's going to make counting the results very, very complicated, and it's really going to make it difficult. Many other countries in the world have actually looked at a space where how do they help consolidate political parties? How do they help make the system more wieldy? You want to avoid a scenario, for example, like in Italy or in Israel, where they have about a new prime minister, new elections every year, because it's so difficult to form a stable majority. If you look at what we've seen in Gauteng in the past 5 years, where mayors have changed every 3 months, then you ask yourself, what is the impact upon service delivery if you're going to change a mayor every 3 months? So we need to find the right balance. I think we're going to have to adjust electoral laws quite a few times over the next decade as our democracy matures and evolves. But we should also be wary of creating unintended consequences and making body politics so fragmented that it's very difficult to provide stability. If you look at Great Britain, they had at one stage 3 prime ministers in about 3 months, and we can't afford that level of political instability given our challenges.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. One can't ever accuse South Africans of not being spoiled for choice, particularly in this upcoming election.